In the heart of the Igbo village of Amokwi, there lived a wise farmer named Chinedu. Chinedu was known throughout the village for his hard work and honesty. His farm was a source of pride, not just for him, but for the entire village. His yams grew the largest, his cassava the sweetest, and his fields the greenest. Every year, during the harvest festival, the villagers would gather at Chinedu's farm to celebrate the bounty that his land provided. But beyond the village, in the bustling town of Nduka, there lived a wealthy and greedy landlord named Is. Is was known for his insatiable hunger for land. He owned many plots across the region, but it was never enough. When he heard about Chinedu's fertile land, he knew he had to have it. Is believed that with such a rich piece of land under his control, his wealth would grow even more. One sunny afternoon, Is arrived in Amokwi, his arrival marked by the sound of horses and the sight of his grand entourage. The villagers gathered, curious and wary of the powerful man who had come to their peaceful home. Chinedu, who was working in his field, paused to see what the commotion was about. When he saw Is approaching, he wiped his hands on his cloth and went to meet him. "Greetings, Chinedu," Is began with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have heard much about your farm. It is indeed a treasure of Amokwi." Chinedu nodded politely. "Thank you, Is. The land is a blessing from our ancestors. I work hard to honor it." Is's smile grew wider, but there was a glint of greed in his eyes. "Chinedu, I am a man of wealth and power. I would like to buy your land. Name your price, and I will make you a rich man. You can live in comfort, without the burden of farm work." Chinedu's heart sank. He had feared this day might come, but he knew his answer. "Is, I appreciate your offer, but this land is not for sale. It has been in my family for generations. It is more than just land, it is our heritage, our home." Is's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "Everything has a price, Chinedu. Do not be a fool. Think of the wealth you could have, the ease with which you could live. You could move to the town, enjoy the luxuries of life." Chinedu shook his head firmly. "No amount of money can buy what this land means to me and my family. It is not just about wealth, Is. It is about honor, about preserving what our ancestors have passed down." Is's face hardened. "Very well, Chinedu. But remember, I always get what I want. If you will not sell the land willingly, then you will leave me no choice." With that, Is turned and left, his entourage following behind. The villagers watched in silence, their hearts heavy with worry for Chinedu. They knew Is's reputation and feared what might come next. Days turned into weeks, and Is's threat began to take shape. He sent his men to harass Chinedu, destroying part of his crops, spreading lies among the villagers, and trying to turn them against the farmer. Some villagers began to distance themselves from Chinedu, afraid of Is's power. But Chinedu remained strong, continuing to work his land with the same dedication and love as before. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Chinedu sat by his hearth, deep in thought. He knew he could not fight Is's wealth and power with force, but he also knew that he could not let the greedy landlord take what was rightfully his. He needed a plan, something that would outsmart Is and protect his land. As Chinedu sat in silence, an idea began to form in his mind. He remembered the stories his father had told him as a child, stories of the wisdom of their ancestors, stories of how they had used their knowledge of the land to overcome challenges. Chinedu smiled to himself, realizing that the answer had been with him all along. The next morning, Chinedu went to the village square and called for a meeting with the elders. He explained his situation and asked for their advice. The elders listened carefully, nodding as they took in his words. Finally, the eldest among them, a man named Okeke, spoke. "Chinedu, your father was a wise man, and you have inherited his wisdom. We have watched you tend this land with love and care, and we know you are right to protect it. But Is a powerful man, and we must be clever if we are to defeat him." Chinedu nodded. I have a plan, but I will need your help, and the help of the entire village. Okeke smiled, his eyes twinkling with approval. We are with you, Chinedu. Tell us what we must do. Chinedu shared his plan with the elders, and soon, the entire village was buzzing with preparations. They worked in secret, knowing that Is had spies everywhere. But they trusted in Chinedu's wisdom and in the strength of their community. On the day that Is was supposed to return to claim the land, the village was eerily quiet. The fields were empty, the market closed, and there was no sign of life. Is arrived with his men, confident that he would finally take possession of the land that he had coveted for so long. But as he approached Chinedu's farm, he was met with a strange sight. The fields that had once been lush and green were now barren and dry. The yams and cassava that had grown so abundantly were withered and dead. Isa's men looked at each other in confusion, unsure of what had happened. Is frowned, not understanding what he was seeing. He marched up to Chinedu, who stood calmly at the edge of the field. What is this, Chinedu? Is demanded. Your land is ruined. Chinedu nodded solemnly. Yes, Is. The land has been cursed by the ancestors. They are angry because you tried to take what does not belong to you. Isa's eyes widened in fear. He had not expected this. A curse. But how? Chinedu sighed. The land knows who belongs to it, Is. It thrives under the care of those who love it, and it withers when greed tries to take hold. The ancestors have spoken. This land will never grow for you, or for anyone who tries to take it by force. Is felt a chill run down his spine. He was a man of power, but he feared the spirits and curses of the land. The sight of the withered crops was enough to convince him that Chinedu spoke the truth. Without another word, Is turned and left, his men following behind him. As they disappeared into the distance, the villagers emerged from their homes, smiling with relief and pride. Chinedu's plan had worked, and the greedy landlord had been defeated, not by force, but by the wisdom and unity of the village. But as Chinedu watched Is leave, he knew that the struggle was not over. Isa's greed would not be quenched so easily, and Chinedu would need to remain vigilant. The land was safe for now, but the battle for justice and the protection of their heritage would continue. And so, Chinedu returned to his farm, his heart filled with gratitude for the support of his village and the guidance of his ancestors. He knew that as long as they stood together, they could overcome any challenge, no matter how powerful their opponent. The sun set over Amokwe, casting a golden light on the fields, and Chinedu felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had done what was right. But the night was still young, and the story of the wise farmer and the greedy landlord was far from over. As the days passed in Amokwe, life slowly returned to normal. The villagers resumed their daily routines, tending to their farms, fetching water from the stream, and gathering in the evenings to share stories and laughter. The story of how Chinedu had outsmarted the greedy landlord spread like wildfire, not just within the village, but to neighboring villages as well. Chinedu became a symbol of wisdom and courage, and the people looked up to him even more. But Chinedu knew that his victory over Is was only temporary. He had seen the look in the landlord's eyes as he left the village, a look of anger, of wounded pride, and of a man who would not easily give up. Chinedu sensed that Is would return, perhaps with an even more devious plan to take what he wanted. One afternoon, while Chinedu was working in his field, he noticed a young boy standing at the edge of his farm. The boy was barefoot, with dusty clothes and a worried expression on his face. Chinedu wiped the sweat from his brow and walked over to the boy. "Hello, young one," Chinedu greeted him kindly. "What brings you to my farm?" The boy looked up at Chinedu, his eyes wide with fear. "My name is Chima," he said in a trembling voice. "I have come to warn you." Chinedu knelt down to be at eye level with Chima. "Warn me? About what, Chima?" Chima hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid someone might be watching. "My father works for Is," he whispered. "I heard them talking." Is planning something bad? He is going to try to take your land again. Chinedu's heart tightened with concern. He placed a reassuring hand on Chima's shoulder. Thank you for telling me this, Chima. You have done a brave thing by coming here. Do not worry, I will make sure no harm comes to my land or to our village. Chima nodded, but the fear in his eyes did not fade. Is very angry, Chinedu. He said he will not rest until he has your land. He said he will use every trick he knows. Chinedu smiled gently at the boy. Is may be powerful, but the spirits of this land are stronger. They protect those who live in harmony with it. And as long as we stand together, Is will not win. Chima nodded again, seeming a little more at ease. I must go now before my father finds out I was here, he said, turning to leave. Wait, Chinedu called after him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small yam he had harvested earlier. Take this with you. It is a gift for your bravery. Chima's face lit up with gratitude as he accepted the yam. Thank you, Chinedu, he said before running off into the distance. As Chinedu watched the boy disappear down the path, he felt a deep sense of unease. He knew that Chima's warning was a sign that trouble was indeed brewing. Is was not a man who would be easily deterred, and Chinedu would need to prepare for whatever the landlord had planned. That night, Chinedu sat by the fire in his hut, thinking about the best course of action. He knew that Isa's wealth gave him many resources, men who could be bribed, officials who could be swayed, and even dark practices that some whispered about in fear. Chinedu had to be careful, not just for himself, but for the entire village. The next morning, Chinedu called another meeting with the elders. This time, he invited not just the elders, but the other farmers and villagers who had helped him before. They gathered in the village square, their faces serious as they listened to Chinedu recount what Chima had told him. Is will not stop, Chinedu said, his voice firm. We have won the first battle, but the war is far from over. We must be prepared for anything he might try. We must protect our land, our heritage, and our way of life. The elders nodded in agreement, their faces lined with worry. What do you propose we do, Chinedu? Asked Okeke, the eldest among them. We must strengthen our bonds as a community, Chinedu replied. We must look out for each other, share information, and be vigilant. If anyone sees or hears anything suspicious, they must report it immediately. We must also be prepared to stand up against any unfair actions that Is may try to use against us. But Is a wealthy man, one of the farmers said, his voice trembling. He has connections in the town, and he can easily bribe officials to turn against us. Chinedu nodded, understanding the man's fear. That is why we must rely on our unity and our wisdom. We will use the knowledge of our ancestors, the teachings that have been passed down to us. We will outsmart Is, just as we did before. The land is with us, and so are the spirits of our forefathers. The villagers murmured among themselves, some still uncertain, but others filled with determination. They knew that Chinedu had led them to victory once before, and they trusted in his wisdom to guide them again. Days turned into weeks, and life in Amokwi continued as usual, but with a heightened sense of awareness. The villagers kept a close watch on their surroundings, and any stranger who entered the village was met with cautious eyes. Chinedu continued to work his land, but he remained ever vigilant, knowing that Is could strike at any moment. Then, one night, under the cover of darkness, Is made his move. It was past midnight when Chinedu heard a rustling outside his hut. He had been restless, unable to sleep, and the sound immediately put him on alert. He quietly got out of bed and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing, but then he noticed a shadow moving near the edge of his field. Chinedu's heart raced as he realized that someone was trying to sabotage his crops. He grabbed his machete and slipped out of his hut, careful not to make a sound. He crept closer to the shadow, his senses sharp and his grip on the machete firm. As he got closer, he saw two men, their faces obscured by scarves, crouched down near his yams. They were pouring something onto the soil, and the smell of it made Chinedu's stomach turn. It was a foul-smelling liquid, likely some sort of poison meant to destroy his crops. Without hesitation, Chinedu leaped forward, swinging his machete in the air. The men jumped back in surprise, but Chinedu was quick. He knocked the bottle of poison out of one man's hand and grabbed the other by the arm. "Who sent you?" Chinedu demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The men struggled, trying to break free, but Chinedu was strong. He twisted the man's arm, forcing him to his knees. "Who sent you?" he repeated. The man winced in pain, but he didn't answer. Chinedu's grip tightened, and the man cried out. "It was he finally confessed. He paid us to destroy your crops. Please, let me go." Chinedu released the man's arm, and the two saboteurs scrambled to their feet, fleeing into the night. Chinedu watched them go, his heart pounding with anger and resolve. Isa's attack had failed, but this was only the beginning. The landlord was determined to take what did not belong to him, and Chinedu knew that the battle for justice and the protection of his land had only just begun. The next morning, Chinedu gathered the villagers once more, recounting what had happened during the night. The news spread quickly, and the villagers were outraged by Isa's underhanded tactics. They vowed to stand by Chinedu, ready to defend their land and their village with everything they had. But as Chinedu looked out at the faces of his friends and neighbors, he knew that the struggle ahead would not be easy. Is was a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, and Chinedu would need all the wisdom, courage, and strength he could muster to protect what was rightfully his. The sun rose high over Amokwe, casting its warm light on the village, and Chinedu felt a deep resolve settle within him. The land was his to protect, and he would not let greed and injustice prevail. But he also knew that the true test of his wisdom and strength was yet to come, and the path ahead was fraught with challenges that would test the very fabric of his soul. The story of the wise farmer and the greedy landlord was far from over, and the battle for justice had only just begun. As the days passed, Chinedu grew increasingly cautious. He knew that Is would not give up easily, and he prepared himself and the village for whatever might come next. The villagers worked together to fortify their homes and fields, taking turns watching over the crops at night. They became a community united by a common cause, determined to protect their land and each other from the greed of the landlord. Is, meanwhile, was growing more desperate. He had tried bribery, intimidation, and even sabotage, but Chinedu and the villagers had stood firm. Isa's pride was wounded, and his anger burned hotter with each failed attempt to claim Chinedu's land. He knew that he had to make a final move, one that would force Chinedu to surrender once and for all. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Is gathered a group of his most loyal men. They were strong and fierce, known for their ruthlessness, and Is promised them a handsome reward if they succeeded in driving Chinedu from his land. The plan was simple: they would storm the village at night, destroy the crops, and set fire to the fields. With no crops to harvest, Chinedu would be forced to sell his land to Is for a pittance. As the night grew darker, Is and his men crept towards Amokwe. The village was quiet, with only the sounds of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. Is felt a thrill of anticipation as they neared Chinedu's farm. This time, he was certain he would win. But as they approached the fields, something strange happened. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air. Is and his men stopped in their tracks, looking around in confusion. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly, the earth split open before them, revealing a deep chasm. Out of the chasm rose a figure, tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed like embers in the night. The men gasped in fear, stumbling backward as the figure stepped forward. It was an ancient spirit of the land, a guardian that had protected the village for generations. The spirit's voice echoed like thunder as it spoke, its words sending chills down the spines of Is and his men. "You who would harm this land, beware," the spirit intoned. This land belongs to those who respect it, who work it with honesty and care. Greed has no place here. You have been warned. Esau's men, terrified by the sight of the spirit, turned and fled into the night, their courage vanishing like smoke. But Esau, blinded by his anger and pride, refused to back down. He stepped forward, raising his fist in defiance. "This land will be mine," Esau shouted. "No spirit, no farmer, no one can stop me." But as Esau took another step towards the chasm, the ground beneath him gave way. He stumbled, trying to regain his footing, but it was too late. The earth opened up, swallowing him whole, and Esau disappeared into the darkness. The villagers, who had been awakened by the commotion, gathered at the edge of the field. They watched in awe as the spirit of the land slowly faded away, the chasm closing behind it. Chinedu stood at the front of the crowd, his heart heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. The next morning, the village was filled with whispers and speculation. Some said that Esau had been taken by the spirits as punishment for his greed. Others believed that the earth itself had rejected him, refusing to allow such a man to claim it. But whatever the cause, one thing was certain: Esau was gone and the village was safe. Chinedu, though saddened by the loss of life, knew that the spirit had done what was necessary to protect the land and the people who depended on it. He gathered the villagers together and spoke to them, his voice steady and calm. "Let this be a lesson to us all," Chinedu said. "Greed and dishonesty will only lead to destruction. We must live in harmony with the land, treating it with respect and care. The land provides for us, and in return, we must protect it from harm." The villagers nodded in agreement, their respect for Chinedu growing even deeper. They understood now that the land was not just a possession, but a living entity that needed to be cared for and cherished. And they knew that as long as they lived by these principles, the land would continue to provide for them and their children for generations to come. The moral of the story is that greed and dishonesty can lead to one's downfall, while wisdom, respect, and living in harmony with the land bring true prosperity and peace.